Welcome. Today's daf is Masechta Zevachim Daf Kuf, number 100. And we're going to begin on Daf Tzadik Tes Amid Beis. And it's a nice discussion today. We'll make it bigger. Tzadik Tes Amid Beis, Montana. So we learned yesterday, when part of this gating came in, is something called aninus. What does aninus mean? Aninus means that the Torah prohibits an oinein, somebody who just lost his parent, let's say a father, a mother, or his wife. So that moment that you lose that loved one, you are an oinein, and you're not allowed to eat kachim that day, the day that they died. What about the following night, the night after? So if they died, let's say on Monday, what about Monday night? Can you eat? So that is the machloikis we're going to learn. That's a machloikis between Reb Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. So let us read here. Hi, Louis. We just began. On Tzadik Tesamav 99. Man Tana, who is our Tana? Aninas Laila Midrabona. That when you lose an oinim, the night after the person died is only asa midrabanan. You're not allowed to eat kachim midrabanan. That is the author of that is Reb Shimon. It's the author of Shimon. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Aninas Laila midivrei Torah, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that, wait a second, the day that a loved one dies, you're an oinein, and that extends to the night after they died, that following night. So Rabbi Yehuda holds imin atayra, you're an oinen even at night. Reb Shimon says at night you're only an oinen min Torah, and not min Torah, but only midrabana. Now, what does that leave you with? Whenever there's a major korban that you have to eat, that the Chachamim said, okay, we're going to suspend that you're not an oinen. So, and that major korban that you must eat is, let's say, korban Pesach. If a loved one died on Erev Pesach, so they're going to tell you to bring the korban Pesach. According to Reb Shimon, you're allowed to bring the korban Pesach, and you yourself are not going to go into the base of English, but let's say you'll send your friend to bring a korban Pesach on your behalf, and you'll eat the korban at night, because Chachamim said, okay, since the korban Pesach is a major korban that you have to eat, and if you don't do korban Pesach, you get kares. So therefore, it must be at night already, when it's Seder night, you're not really an oinen daraisa, you're only an oinen derabanan. And the Rabbanan said, we're going to suspend what our restriction. Heida Sharei Amru, because it's a famous saying. Oinin toivel va'oicheles pischoi le'erev, and oinin could, after, before the Seder, let's say he was an oinin, his grandfather, his parent died erev Pesach, so then at night he could be toivel and eat his korban Pesach at night. He could eat his korban Pesach at the Seder. Avaloi kachim, not any other kachim, only korban Pesach. So we see that the night after the day of death, is only midrabanan. So Reb Shimon is holding that an oinen could bring the korban Pesach on Erev Pesach, because he's going to eat it at night. So now the Gemara asks a contradiction. Sava Reb Shimon aninas laila midrabanan. Does Reb Shimon hold that the anina of night, oinen at night, is only midrabanan, and therefore an oinen could bring a korban Pesach? But Tanya, we learned in a Brisa, Reb Shimon says, an oinen should not have somebody else bring the korban on his behalf. Let's say it's a shlamim or something like that, and he'll eat it. So what you see from there, that not only an oinen cannot have somebody bring any shlamim, but probably, doesn't it mean even a korban Pesach? My love afilu Pesach, that even Reb Shimon would hold that an oinen should not send somebody to bring his korban Pesach on his behalf. Answers the Gemara, levar mi Pesach, everything except the korban Pesach. Says the Gemara, Vatanya, we learned in a Brisa, Reb Shimon says the following statement. There's a famous carbon called a shlomim. Shlomim. Why is it called shlomim? So we darshan, because the Torah says v'mzevach shlomim karbonai. So we darshan a lot of things. When you have a settled mind, then you can bring this carbon shlomim, but not when you're an oinen. You just lost a loved one. And menayin rabbis is toida. How do I know a carbon toida you're not allowed to bring? You're not allowed to bring when you're an oinim. A toida is an offering of thanks. So it has a din that you're eating it in a state of happiness, like a shlomim, and therefore, just like a shlamim is not brought when you're an oinen, so also a toid is not brought when you're an oinen. How do I know a carbon oila you don't bring? And here, a carbon oila, you're not eating any part of the carbon. So answers the Gemara. An oila is a carbon that can be brought out of a donation. You could donate an oila. So it has similarities to a shlamim, and therefore an oinen cannot bring the shlamim. They cannot bring a carbon oila. And here's the key word. Masa Pesach says Rab Shimon. How do I know my bechor masa Pesach should not be brought by an oinim? Because they're not because you did a sin. That's why you bring this carbonas. It's for a reason you're bringing the carbon, but not because you did an avera, and therefore it's like a shlamim, and it's not to be brought when you're an oinen. Kol carbonis. Here's the bottom line. Kol carbonis maybe doesn't matter whatever carbon you bring, maybe. When you are in a good state of mind, bring it. Maybe you don't bring it when it's an oinen. So katano mia pesach. So this brisa says, Rab Shimon clearly says that an oinen does not bring the carbon pesach, and we have a brisa that says before oinen toivel. Rab Shimon says an oinen will go to the mikvah and eat his carbon pesach that night, so probably could bring the carbon pesach during the daytime. So it's a steerit. Can an oinen bring the carbon pesach or not? Answers the Gemara. Amar Chizda Pesach kedi nasve. Right. Remove the word pesach from that previous price. It was quoting all carbonis that an oinen cannot bring, and it included pesach in that list. It's a mistake, or it was mentioned for nothing. But really, an oinen could bring a carbon pesach. Again, why could he bring a carbon pesach? Because what's going to happen? He brings the carbon pesach. He has his friend bring the carbon pesach, and at night, during Seder night, he'll eat the carbon pesach. He's an oinen the rabbanon. Rabbanon suspended that he's not an oinen. Rav Shesha says, "My pesach shalmei pesach." What does it mean? An oinen brings the carbon pesach in this brisa. He does not bring the carbon pesach. Means shalmei pesach. He doesn't bring the shlomims that are brought with the carbon pesach. Pesach he brings, but not the shlomims that are brought for Pesach. We know that you bring a carbon shlomim along with the Pesach, so that you eat the carbon Pesach when you're in a state of fullness. So that shalmei Pesach you don't bring. Says the Gemara, but it already said an oinen doesn't bring shlomim. So why does it single out a shalmei Pesach that he doesn't bring? Answers the Gemara, Tana Shlomim Aboy Machmas Pesach, Tana Shlomim Aboy Machmas Atzmim. It says two types of Shlomim. A Shlomim that you're bringing because of the carbon Pesach, and a regular Shlomim. The Eloi Tani Shlomim Aboy Machmas Pesach was, if had it not said that it Shlomim Aboy Machmas Pesach, that the oinen doesn't bring, I would think that he does bring it. Hoyel Machmas Pesach also, since he's bringing the Shlomim, so he can eat the carbon Pesach when he's full. Kegufa the Pesach dummy, so it should be like the regular Pesach, which you're allowed to bring. Kamash malam, that that you're now allowed to bring the shlomim. Both Rav Sheshes and Rav Chizda's teretz both hold of this idea that a carbon Pesach, an oinen, could bring a carbon Pesach. So if someone's parent or a loved one died erev Pesach, you bring the carbon Pesach. Comes along Rav Mari. Rav Mari says, now we go on Daf Kuf. And we start Daf Kuf. Loi kasha, it's not difficult. He said, Khan, the brisa that says that an oinen does not bring a carbon pasach, he's going to say, Shemeis loy meis b'yudalad, the loved one died on the 14th, ukvore b'yudalad, and you buried it on the 14th. And therefore, at night, it's still usher. Because since you did the misa and the burial happened the same day, that night is even usher midaraisa. Kam, but the Mishnah is talking where Oinen could eat her carbon pasach. It's talking about Shbeis loy meis b'yigimel. On the 13th of Nisan, his loved one died. Ukvora b'yudalad, and he buried it on the 14th. So he only did burial on the 14th. So therefore, it's only usher. It's not even usher midrabanan at night. It's only usher of Yom Kvura. It's usher midrabanan at night, and therefore it's suspended. The restriction would suspend itself for the carbon pasach, because meis loy meis biyodalid or kvar biyodalid. Since if the death happened on the 14th and you buried on the 14th, yom misa typhus leila midaraisa, the day of death includes the night afterwards. So therefore, that's the second brisa that says an oinen should not bring his carbon pasach. Why? Because if the loved one died on the 14th that night, you're still going to be considered an oinen. But if the loved one died on the 13th, ukvari b'yadalit, and the burial happened on the 14th, yon kvura midrabanim. That night is only asam midrabanim. Ein a typhus laila el midrabanim. It doesn't extend to the night only midrabanim, and rabbanan suspended their restrictions in order for you to be allowed to eat your carbon pasach. Therefore, if just the burial happened on the 14th, you could bring your carbon pasach. Amalei Rav Asher Rav Mari, then Rab Shimon and Rab Yehuda both agree, so they're not really arguing. Name Malay, what does Rab Yehuda say to Rab Shimon? I'm talking about, I say the night is Doraisa, and you say the night is Rabbanim. But we're talking about two different things. Says Rabbi Yehuda could say, I'm talking about if the day of death, that night is Asa Doraisa. And you're telling me that the day of burial, that night is Asa Rabbanim. So we're talking about two different things. So they're really not arguing. Kasha, that's a difficult question. But that's how you answer the two steers of Rab Shimon, according to Rab Mari. Very simple. When do we say in the second brisa, Oinen should not bring his carbon pasach? If the burial, if the death happened on the 14th. And when do we say an Oinen could bring his carbon? He should bring his carbon if just the burial happened on the 14th. Abaya is going to answer. He's the fourth answer for this contradiction. Like kasha, it's not a difficult contradiction. Khan, when the second brisa says an oinen should not bring a carbon pasach. Why? Shemeis koidim chatzos. The death, it's talking about the death happened before chatzos. So if the death happened before midday, so which came first? The aninis came first, and then the chiyuv of carbon pesach came first, second. So then we say you're an oinen, you should stay with your aninis and do not bring the carbon pesach. Kan, but in the Mishnah that says that Rabbi Shimon says you could bring the carbon pesach. The death of the loved one happened after midday, but already at midday he had an obligation to bring his carbon pesach, and therefore we're going to allow him to bring his carbon pesach and eat the carbon pesach that night, even though we're going to say that the aninis is going to, the aninis at night is drabona, and we're going to allow him to bring the carbon pesach if it preceded the death of the loved one. If the chiyuv, so the Gemara explains, koidim chasois, if the loved one died before midday, at that time you couldn't bring the carbon pesach anyway. First you're an oinen, and therefore we're going to say stay in oinen, don't bring the carbon pesach. But if the loved one died after chatzos, the ichazele pesach, you're really supposed to have brought the carbon pesach. Then we're going to tell you that we're going to suspend the aninas drabanan that night, and now allow you to bring the carbon pesach, even if you didn't bring it already. So after chatzos, already you had the chi of carbon pesach. If then the loved one dies, so then that night you could eat the carbon pesach. We'll allow you to bring the carbon pesach and eat it. And that resolves the contradiction. Now we're going to open a parenthesis till the end of the page. So there's a difference between if a person dies before chatzos or if the loved one died after chatzos. So Abaya says, where did I get this concept? I get this concept of differentiating between the death happening before midday or after midday. I have that because I answered another contradiction. And the way I answered that other contradiction, that gave me the idea that there's a difference between the death happening before midday and after midday. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa. Lo Yatama. The Torah tells you that a koyim should be mitama if his loved one died. If one of the 7 relatives died, then he should get involved and bury that relative. Let's say his father, mother, or his unmarried sister. Mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. And loyratza, if he doesn't want to help out with the burial, we force him to touch the dead body, to get involved in burying the loved one. Gemara brings a story with Yosef HaKoyin. Shemesa Ishti, his wife died, Be'erev Pesach, and he felt he's a Koyin and he wants to bring that carbon Pesach even though his wife just died. But he did not want to become Tameh. The Kahanim got surrounded him, and they forced him to be Mitama Bal Karche. So that's forced him to be Mitama Bal Karche against his will. Says the Gemara, Uraminu, I'll ask you a contradiction. So we see from here that you don't bring your carbon Pesach, right? You don't bring the carbon Pesach. We actually ask you get involved with the burial of your wife and don't bring the carbon Pesach. Uraminu, I'll ask you a contradiction to that. It says by a Nazir is never allowed to be mitama to anybody. And the Torah tells you that not even to his sister, a Nazir is allowed to mitama himself. What does that teach you? A man went and he went to his intention was to shech his carbon pesach, a nazir, and to give a milah for his son so he can shech his carbon pesach. So he's doing a bunch of mitzvahs. And the nazir heard that his sister died. I might think the nazir should stop what he's doing and mitama to his sister. We say lo yitama. Don't be mitama to your sister. I would think that if you tell me a nazir can't be mitama to his own sister, now let's say he's the only one that sees this dead body in front of him, which is a meis mitzvah, we will tell him not to be mitama. That for your sister you don't be mitama, but you can be mitama yourself for a meis mitzvah. So lav shma mina. Don't you hear from here? Why does one place do we say that you don't bring the carbon pesach, and by the nazir we say do bring your carbon pesach even though your sister died? So kan, by the case of the kohen, we say koydem chatzois. Your wife, the person's wife died before midday, and therefore he was an einin before that. So we say don't bring your carbon pesach because you're an einin first. Kan. But over here, by the nazir, we say, don't be mitama to your sister and bring the carbon pesach, even though you're an oinen. Why? Why should I tell you to be an oinen? But even if you're not going to be mitama, you still shouldn't be eating the carbon pesach because it's talking about la'achar chatzois, that the Nazir's sister died after Chatzos. So really, he was supposed to bring his carbon Pesach. He was ready to bring his carbon Pesach, and then he heard his sister died. So since he had the chiyuv to bring his carbon Pesach, right? Even though he's an Einin, right? He's an Einin. We'll tell him to bring the carbon Pesach and eat that carbon Pesach at night, since the obligation to have a carbon Pesach preceded his aninus. Says the Gemara. So now that's how Rabbi got that differentiation between before Chatzos or after Chatzos. Says the Gemara, "My, how do you know that to be the case?" Maybe I will tell you. Really, even by the Kohen's case, where a Kohen heard his sister died, it was also after Chatzos, and therefore we tell him not to bring the carbon Pesach. Why do we tell him not to bring the carbon Pesach? Not because we have another reason why. Because he has an obligation not only to go to the Levaya, he has an obligation to touch the body. It's not that the Torah says when the Kohen's sister dies, he could touch the body. The Torah is telling you have an obligation to get involved and touch the body. So that's why since he's going to touch the body and become tamei, that's why he can't bring his carbon Pesach. So you're going to say the Rabbi Shmuel. The second brisa is Rabbi Shmuel. The first brisa that says that the Kohen can't bring his carbon Pesach goes according to Rabbi Kiva that he has to touch the body. The Tanya, we learned in the brisa, lo yitama. The Torah tells you a Kohen that heard his sister died, he should be metama to her. Rishus, that doesn't mean he has to actually touch the body. Divri Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Kiva says it's a chayva, it's an obligation. So since he's obligated to do that, so that's why he couldn't bring the carbon Pesach, because he's tamei. He's going to be touching the body. But the second brisa maybe goes according to Rabbi Shmuel, and therefore, according to the second brisa, which says a Nazir should bring his carbon Pesach, he means that because he would never have an obligation to be mitama to his sister, to actually touch the body. So the Gemara says, Loi sal kadaita, will never have such a thought. The Reisha that Rabbi Akiva Katarin, because even the second brisa goes according to Rabbi Akiva. The Tanya, we learned in the brisa, and this is the whole second brisa about a Nazir. Torah tells you about a Nazir, he shouldn't be metamet to anybody. He's like a Kohen Gadol. Nefesh elu akroivim, meis elu rechoikim. Relatives, non-relatives, he should not be metamet to. La'aviv, why does it say he should be metamet? He's not supposed to be metamet to his father. Ein metame, aber metame hu lemeis mitzvah. He can be metama if it's a meis mitzvah. La'imai, hoya kohen vu nazar, even if he's a kohen and a nazar, li'imai hu de'ein metame, aber metame hu lemeis mitzvah. So even if he has two strikes in his favor, he's a kohen and a nazar, he still cannot be metama to his mother. La'achiv, shim hoya kohen gadol, even if he has three strikes, he's a kohen gadol, hu nazar, and he's a nazar. La'achiv hu de'ein metame, aber metame hu lemeis mitzvah. La'achoisai, he shouldn't be metama to his sister. Ma'atamad loimam. Hareisha halach lishches pischa v'lamas b'noi v'shama shemesh lemes yochel yitamet. Let's say he's a kohen or whatever. He's a nazir, kohen, anything, and he's going to shech this Pesach and bring a bris milah for his son. I might think that he should be metama to his sister. Amrit lo yitama. We tell him no tame. Yochel shem shenim metama la'choisai kachen metama lemes mitzvah. But that the exception is if it's a body that nobody's burying. So ends the parentheses. So basically, the parentheses was just a side point, but the point is Abaya stands what his answer of the stira. The question was, how do you answer the stira between one place Rav Shimon says an Oinen should bring the carbon Pesach, and one place says Oinen should not bring the carbon Pesach? Simple answer. When it says he doesn't bring the carbon Pesach, is because the death happened before Chatzos. When it says that Oinen could bring his carbon Pesach, is because the death happened after Chatzos, where the obligation of carbon Pesach preceded the Aninis. That's the teretz. Now we go to Amud Beis, and we'll finish up with this with the final thing. Rava says, I have a teretz. The stira between Rav Shimon and Rav Shimon, doesn't matter. They both could be talking about where the death of the loved one happened after midday. Like Kasha, and I don't have a difficulty anymore, because Khan that says that you don't bring the carbon pesach, that Khan, where it says that you don't eat from the you don't bring the carbon pesach, is because Kaidim Shesharchu V'Zarka Olam is talking about they didn't bring the carbon pesach. So if the death happened after Chatzos, he's in Oinen, we'll tell him, stop, don't bring the carbon pesach. Khan, but the brisa that says that he eats from the carbon pesach is talking about if they shechted the carbon pesach on his behalf. They shechted already. So yes, he's in Oinen. Yes, midrabanan, he should not be allowed to eat the carbon pesach that night, but they suspended it because it happened that they shechted it at night. They shechted it, and then he found out that he's an oinen. So then we say he can eat from the carbon pesach. So generally, Rava's answer is very simple. An oinen cannot bring his carbon pesach, but if it was brought, his carbon pesach, and then he became an oinen, that night he could eat the carbon pesach. So Amalei, and this is where we'll end. Amalei Ravada Bamasna Rava Acha Sheshachtu V'Zarku Es Domai Mai Dahava Hava. Why do we allow an oinen to eat from the carbon pesach if it was shechted? If it was shechted, and then he becomes an oinen, right? Why do at night do I allow him to eat the carbon pesach? He did his mitzvah already. You did your mitzvah, shechting the carbon pesach. Amalei Ravina said the following: Achilas psachim akva. The whole mitzvah is not just shechting, but actually eating from the carbon pesach. Because that's what Rabbi Bar Huna taught us, that there's a mitzvah, the complete mitzvah of carbon pesach is when you actually eat from the carbon pesach. So if they shechted the carbon pesach already, and then he finds out he's an oinan, since they shechted the carbon pesach, then we're going to allow him to eat from the carbon pesach. But if they didn't shech the carbon pesach, then we're going to tell him, don't bring the carbon pesach on your behalf. So it's not a stira between Rav Shimon and Rav Shimon. Actually, in Oinen, Rav Shimon will say is not allowed to bring a carbon pesach, but Rav Shimon would agree that if they did bring a carbon pesach and then he finds out he's an Oinen, or he became an Oinen after they brought the carbon pesach, he will be allowed to eat the carbon pesach, because eating the carbon pesach is very, very important. And the Gemara is going to say, because Rabbi Bar Huna taught that teaching, and the Gemara answers a stira, and that's how Rabbi Bar Huna taught that teaching. Okay, we'll stop over here.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Have a great evening.
Enough, thank you.
Thank you.